All right. Hello, everyone. Now we have 21 participants and still growing. So I will start it. All right. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good evening, everyone. Selamat malam. Welcome to the Social Work International Lecture Series Special Sessions, held in commemoration of the 2025 World Refugee Day. This event is proudly organized by the Indonesian National Association Social Workers in collaborations with national universities and institutions. My name is Suhaila, and I am honored to serve as the host for tonight's sessions. Before we begin, allow me to extend a warm welcome to our esteemed guests and participants. First and foremost, we are deeply honored to welcome our distinguished speaker, Ms. Emily Bojovic, the Senior Protection Officer, United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, Indonesia. Ms. Ruth Stark, former President of the International Federation of Social Workers, IFSW, and an independent social worker. Father Johansson, Regional Director of Jesuits Refugee Service Asia Pacific. Mr. Bakir Bayani, Global Refugee Participation Lead of Asylum Access. Mr. Teguh Zuliadi, Head of Social Welfare Department, Araniri University. We are also pleased to welcome our moderator for this evening, Ibu Sri Rejeki Sulistiawati, who will be guiding us through the next sessions. A special welcome as well to representative from the Ministry of Social Affairs of Indonesia and the Indonesian National Council of Social Welfare. Warm welcome to Dr. Puji Pujiono MSW, the President of the Indonesian Independent Association of Professional Social Workers, along with specialized social worker associations and provincial chapters. Special thanks to our collaborating university, Muhammadiyah Jakarta University, the Islamic State University of Jakarta, Binawan University, University of Indonesia, Pajajaran University, and Ar-Raniri University. To all social workers, lecturers, students, humanitarian workers, and refugee community members joining us via Zoom and YouTube, we are truly honored by your presence and grateful for your support. Ladies and gentlemen, the Social Work International Lecture Series, or ILS, is a regular forum aimed at encouraging global knowledge exchange and strengthening the practice of social work through learning and collaborations. It serves as a bridge between global insight and local actions, empowering social workers to grow and lead in their fields. Tonight's session is a special one as we come together to commemorate World Refugee Day 2025 under the theme Solidarity in Action for Refugee Rights and Resilience. Ladies and gentlemen, this is more than just an event. It is a moment for us to reflect, to connect, and to stand together with refugees around the world. It reminds us of the influence we have as a professionals, as a communities, and as individuals to help create a world where refugees are protected, included, and empowered to thrive. Our goals tonight are simple but meaningful. The first one, to raise awareness about refugee issues, especially here in Indonesia. Second one, to learn from those working directly in the field. And the last one, to recognize the vital role of social workers and refugee-led organizations in building effective, right-based solutions. We are fortunate to have an outstanding lineup of speakers offering global, regional, and local perspective. We will begin with keynote remarks from Ms. Emily Bojovic, Senior Protection Officer at UNHCR Indonesia, followed by panel presentation from Ms. Ruth Stark, continued by Father Johansson, continued by Mr. Bakir Bayani, and will be closed by Mr. Teguh Zuliadi. Now, to officially open the session, we are honored to invite Dr. Puji Pujiono, the President of the Indonesian Independent Association of Professional Social Workers, to deliver the opening remarks. Pak Puji, the floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished participants, good evening. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I'm Puji Pujiono, President of the Indonesian Independent Association of Professional Social Workers. Welcome you to this Social Work International Lecture Series, a special event organized for 2025 World Refugee Day with the theme of Solidarity and Action for Refugee Rights and Resilience. Our distinguished speakers will enlighten you much more on this. I would like to welcome Ms. Emily Bojovic, the Senior Protection Officer of UNHCR here in Jakarta. Our dear Ms. Ruth Spark, the esteemed former President of the International Federation of Social Workers and practicing as social worker in Scotland now. Father Joe Hampson, our dear friend who is also leader of Jesuit Refugee Service in Asia and the Pacific. Brother Muhammad Bakir Bayani, a refugee himself, a leader in the Refugee Access, an organization advocating for refugee rights, as well as my dear friend, Professor Teguh Zuliadi from the Araniri University in Aceh, who has been working with Rohingya refugees. Ladies and gentlemen, the year of 2025 is indeed a terrible year, and we're just on the middle of the year. A massive humanitarian funding cuts happened this year. A gross violation of human rights that is continuing until now, escalating armed conflict in the Middle East, and the massive reorganization of the UN. All of this mixed together put the life of refugees even harder and even more uncertain. Closer to home, the Indonesian Independent of Professional Social Workers, my organization, have been working with refugee community for quite some time. We provided training with refugee-led organizations and others. So I hope that this conversation will bring us not only to be informed, but I hope that it will transform our perspective and be more listening and stand ready to work with refugees and those who are supporting refugee rights to improve their life and their future. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank our collaborating organization, namely the Ministry of Social Affairs of the Republic of Indonesia, as well as the National Council of Social Welfare of Indonesia, and the premier universities who have the Department of Social Welfare and working with us in this international lecture series, namely the Muhammadiyah University in Jakarta, the Binawan University, the State Islamic University in Jakarta, the Pajajaran University, and of course the University of Indonesia. Also, I would like to thank Ibu Sri Rejeki, who has been gracious to be moderator of this conversation today, and not the least, the very able program manager of the International Lecture Series, Ms. Disha Marianti. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish you a good deliberation, and we stand ready to take forward your recommendation from here onward. Good evening. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Pak Puji, for your thoughtful remarks. Your words set a strong foundation for today's discussions. Ladies and gentlemen, with that, we now officially open today's sessions. Once again, thank you to all our distinguished guests and participants for joining us today. Before we move forward, here are a few quick housekeeping reminders to ensure a smooth session. Please keep your microphone muted unless invited to speak. This session is conducted in English. If you need help with understanding, feel free to use the closed captions on Zoom. Our team has also shared instruction in the chat. We encourage active participation. To participate, please use the raise hand feature or type your questions into the chat box. We will prioritize live questions during the Q&A, followed by the selected written ones. You are welcome to ask questions in English or Bahasa Indonesia. The moderator will assist with translation as needed. And the last one, please note that this session is being recorded for documentation purpose. Ladies and gentlemen, we now move to the main part of our program. It is my pleasure to invite our moderator, Ibu Sri Rejeki Sulistiowati, known as Ibu Sri. Ibu Sri is a graduate of Social Welfare Department at the University of Indonesia. She holds a master's in communications and brings over 17 years of experience working with children on the streets and the elderly through the Tratai Foundation. She currently serves as a counselor, coach, and educator, and is also the head of the management department at the Vocational Senior High School in Depok. We are very honored to have her with us tonight. Without further ado, I hand over the floor to Ibu Sri.
Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you to MC, Miss Suhaila. And I really feel happy because you already take a little bit my job this evening. But maybe I have to greeting all of you. First of all, I would like to warmly welcome to our distinguished speakers. First, Miss Emily Bojovic from UNHCR Indonesia. Second, Miss Ruth Stark, former president of IFSW. Third, Father Johansson from GRS Asia Pacific. Fourth, Mr. Bagir Bayani from Asylum Access. And the last speaker, fifth, Mr. Teguh Zuliadi from R. Ranieri University. A special welcome to representative from the Ministry of Social Affairs, the Indonesian National Council of Social Welfare, and to Dr. Puji Pujono, President of IPSPI, along with colleagues from professional associations and profession chapters. Our thanks to our university partner, Muhammadiyah Jakarta University, the Islamic State University of Jakarta, Binawan University, University of Indonesia, Pajajaran University, and R. Ranieri University. As we know, this webinar have the theme Solidarity in Action for Refugee Rights and Resilience, and also commemorating 2025 World Refugee Day. And maybe I will repeat again, the primary objective of this webinar are to raise the awareness about the rights, need, and the aspirations of the refugees, and then encouraging global support and solidarity. And it also seeks to highlight the refugee situations in Indonesia, emphasizing the challenges they face and the effort being made to address them. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to inform about the lecture process and the rule tonight. First, all speakers have 15 minutes, and each speaker have time 15 minutes to deliver the presentation. After all speakers are finished, we can or entering the next session, Q&A session. And first Q&A session, I will give 3 chances for the question from live participant. And if we have still time, we will open the second part of Q&A from chat column. Maybe it's the rule for tonight. And I would like to invite Mr. Emily Bojovic from UNHCR Indonesia to give the keynote speaker. To Miss Emily Bojovic, it's your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ibu Sri, and good evening, everyone. Selamat malam. I'm so grateful to be here tonight. My time, I guess it's afternoon Ruth's time, but tonight my time. Thank you very much to Dr. Puji and to IPSPI for organizing this. A special thanks, I think, to Disya, who's just done an amazing job in working with all of us to put this event together. So thank you so very much to all of you. This is a really important session, I think, on refugee rights and resilience. This is a topic, obviously, I work for UNHCR, so it's a topic very close to my heart, and it's one that I think that it's important to continue to reflect upon within the community of social workers. So just to provide a little bit of background on refugees and on World Refugee Day, as Dr. Puji mentioned earlier, and as we can really sadly and painfully see, wars and violence and insecurity are really proliferating across the world. And there are many consequences of that violence, and displacement is one of them. At the moment, 1 in every 67 people on this planet is displaced from their homes. That's 123 million forcibly displaced people who have been displaced by war, by violence, by persecution. Of course, we have to talk about the statistics because I think it sort of gives you a picture of how heavy that is, how many that is. But of course, behind each statistic is an individual. It's a unique story of someone who once had a home, who once had a job, who once had a community, who once had plans for their future, all of which have been broken through no fault of their own. And these wars are accompanied, certainly lately, by a breakdown in international humanitarian and human rights laws. A failure in many places, though not in Indonesia, thankfully, but a failure in many places around the world to respect the obligations that countries have made to protect life, to protect those who are fleeing their homes and are in search of safety, and to allow humanitarian aid to get to people who are really in need. So at the very core of our humanity. And this now is accompanied by the brutal funding cuts that have been mentioned earlier tonight and wavering commitments that undermine our collective ability to address the most basic needs of refugees and asylum seekers and to ensure that they have solutions. So the consequences are immediate, the consequences are devastating, and refugees now face a double crisis. So they have the trauma of exile, and they have the collapse of the systems of support that have been put in place to help them. Of course, in the refugee context, there's a lot of sadness, there's a lot of anxiety about the future, but as always, at the same time, there is a lot of hope, there's a lot of good, and there's a lot of solidarity. So World Refugee Day is an event that we celebrate on the 20th of June every year. It comes obviously at a very interesting time in the humanitarian world this year, a time when we really need to show a strengthened commitment and a time when we really need to work together. World Refugee Day is an opportunity each year to pause and to reflect on the incredible courage and spirit of refugees and on the compassion and humanity that we find all around the world. This year's World Refugee Day, the theme is solidarity. And solidarity was chosen as the theme because I think it presents an opportunity to show solidarity to refugees, to listen to their voices, to honor their stories, to support their efforts, to build a community with them, and to work together for peace and for solutions. Maybe just one point to consider before we move on to the excellent speakers that we have tonight. We really need to reflect, I think, on how we can collectively make refugees' lives better in the countries in which they're living, and stop waiting for a solution to come from somewhere else. Currently, resettlement, which I think many refugees have always relied on as a solution to life as a refugee. Resettlement is when you're moved to another country where you can restart your life. Resettlement numbers have shrunk around the world, so there are very few resettlement spaces that are being offered for 2025. At the same time, there's continued instability, violence in the countries from which refugees are fleeing, and that, of course, prevents them from returning back home. So the reality is, without solutions in a third country, without solutions in their country of origin, the reality is that refugees will remain in the countries to which they've fled for years, for decades, and maybe in some cases for their entire lives. So we must work to create opportunities for refugees in those countries, opportunities to engage, to grow, to flourish, to have activities, to learn, to contribute, to be a part of a community. Social workers and the ecosystem that is around social work, I think, can play a very big role in that. Engaged social workers can help us advocate for refugees to access systems that are already in place in the countries of asylum, so public education systems, health insurance systems, social welfare systems. These systems are much more efficient, much more effective, and of better quality than these parallel humanitarian systems that we often set up in refugee hosting countries. I know social workers often work with governments, have very close relationships with governments, and I think they can help us in our advocacy on this point. Engaged social workers can also use your incredible heart and your incredible skills, as I know many are doing in Indonesia, to support refugees in their lives in the countries in which they're hosted. So whether that be helping them seeking educational opportunities, helping young adults build skills that they can use to access opportunities, helping women and children who are suffering from abuse, helping refugees who can no longer afford their rent and need a place to stay. All of these roles, I think, are part of the social worker skill set, part of your life, part of your ethos, part of your heart, part of your mission. So I hope that we can continue to work together and to continue to engage the social work community in responding to the needs of refugees around the world. Thank you very much. And Ibu Sri, I go back to you.
Okay, thank you, Miss Emily, for very wonderful from your keynote remark. And next speaker will be given by Miss Ruth, and she will talk about on-right based on social work approaches. To Miss Ruth Stark, it's your time.
Thank you very much, and good evening, and thank you for this opportunity to share with you some of my experiences as working with us as a social worker with people in the UK who have come in the refugee route or not, or applying for refugee status and asylum seeking status in the UK. And I want to approach some of the issues from a slightly different perspective than the one that has just been presented, with which I fully agree with all of the issues that are there. But I want to focus on two things. One is about what happens to somebody who is seeking asylum or who has refugee status, who comes into difficulty in the country in which that status is being considered. And this is something I came across quite late in my career, I have to say, sadly, but one which I have a great deal of concern about now. And I came involved with it through lawyers, not through social welfare structures or anything like that, but through lawyers who said people's human rights are being abused here. And is there a role that you have as a social worker in actually explaining to people about what is actually happening to those who find themselves facing deportation or extradition? And that's where I want to start, with two short stories about people that I have worked with and about some of the issues that came up. And this is about both structural and ethical dilemmas that we face. And I think this is becoming increasingly poignant when we hear people like President Trump and other leaders around the world saying, people have to go home, they have to go back, that we don't want immigration. And I think there's a whole series of issues which are much more complex and will need all of us to work together if we're actually going to get a just solution to some of these issues. The final part I want to talk about is a macro problem, and it was touched on in the previous presentation, which is about the generations of people who are living in cities within countries without citizens' rights. But I'll come back to that at the end, because I think there's a real challenge for all of us in that. But this first one is really, I'm going to start with talking about Ali. Ali I met when he was 22, and he was in a Scottish prison. He'd been serving a sentence for what is called unlawful sexual intercourse with a girl under the age of 16. And he was facing deportation to Afghanistan. He had last lived in Afghanistan when he was 4 years old. So he didn't know anybody, he had no connections with the country, but here he is sitting in a prison cell in Edinburgh, facing the fact that he would be going back to somewhere he did not know. And I think one of the first things that any social worker should be doing is listening to the story, listening to that person tell us what it is that has happened to them. And then we can begin that working relationship about what we can then do to help find some kind of way forward that is not going to send people back to hopelessness. So Ali had been in Afghanistan and with his family, and he's growing up, and the Taliban came to power. And when he was 4 years old, his family had to flee. And he was told, lie down there next to those dead people and don't move. And that was his first encounter at 4 years old about his first step on the long journey that brought him to Scotland. That in itself is traumatic for any 4-year-old. His family fled to Pakistan. They set up a shop, get re-established. And then there was an earthquake when he was 11 years old. His entire family was wiped out in the earthquake. His father's assistant, who was then about 15, took care of Ali for a little while, and then he got to the age where he wanted to get married, and he couldn't care for Ali any further, and so it was arranged that Ali would be trafficked across Europe to a better life. This better life included being trafficked across Europe, being sexually abused in France, trying to flee that and go and report to the police that he had been sexually abused. He was housed in a hostel. The gang found him again, and he was trafficked again in one of those small boats going across the channel. He was 13 by this time, and he was found in Glasgow, and he became a looked after child within the public care system that operates in Scotland. At this time, totally really unused to unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. And there was a lot of debate about who was going to pay for this, what was the status, lots of procedural, structural issues. And nobody really was, they were so busy, the professionals were so busy concentrating on the structural issues, nobody really listened to his story. And that was very difficult for him to explain because he didn't speak English, and there were not people around who would be able to converse in his particular dialect about all that had happened to him on his journey. As with any young person, he came to the age when he was supposed to be leaving care, so they put him into supported flat accommodation. This was a highly traumatized young person with no connections anywhere in the world, and he was lonely. And he was also, because of the difficulties in psychological and emotional development, his development was delayed in terms of making social relationships. So when he meets up with somebody who is just a couple of years younger than him, and he's looking for warmth and relationships, hey ho, they form a sexual relationship and a baby is born. And this man then ends up in prison as the offender. And the Home Office want to extradite, to deport him to Afghanistan. And the support systems are not there. I want to leave that with you as to how, as social workers, any of us are working with these kind of situations in the structural context in which we come across them, but with the huge ethical problems, because I don't think he at any point, I know he didn't think that he was abusing this young girl. He saw her as a peer. But he had hit a legal system that says you cannot have sex with a young girl under the age of 16. Whatever we might think about that, however we might deal with it, the way that it was dealt with and is being dealt with in this country is not acceptable, because culturally, in his own background, that might have been acceptable. And I think that we ignore some of these big issues about relationships and how people are lonely and so alone on some of these journeys. I'll leave that one with you. The second one is Hong. Hong came from Vietnam. Hong, it was in the middle of the Vietnam War. And his father was killed and his mother fled, and he was adopted by another family, but he didn't know that he'd been adopted until he was 15 years old. Now, at that time in anybody's life, 15 is that time when you're making that transition from childhood to adulthood, and to find your total, the identity that you thought you'd grown up with isn't actually your identity, is very, very traumatic. And he did what many adoptees do faced in that situation. He went in search of his birth family. So he drifted. He drifted for quite a long time. And when he was drifting around the seaports, he came across two people that he referred to as uncles who befriended him. And he was caught in the regime distributing political leaflets. So he was detained. He was tortured. Big medical reports were done much later to describe the devastating torture he experienced. Eventually, he was trafficked through China, Russia, Northern Europe. He worked for several different people, modern day slavery, trafficking. He was a victim of all of these things. And eventually he ends up in London, where he is again being forced to work in a cannabis factory. He ends up being he has applied for asylum in Hungary, France, Germany, and they've all been, he's never been able to complete an application in any of these countries. At the age of 45, he finally gets leave to remain. I won't go into all of the details because I'm running out of time, but just to say, we need to listen to these stories, to what is happening to people. Because if we don't start working together globally, from whatever professions we are coming from whatever communities we are coming from, these are the issues that people are facing when they find themselves displaced. And I finally want to just end my contribution at this point by talking about places like Nakivale refugee camp in Uganda, or the camps that are in Jordan, which are generations of families that are building these communities where they have no citizens' rights. And I think that that's something that some of our professional associations should actually be working together. And we started to do that with the People's Charter back in 2022. And I think we need to go on building those partnerships on a global basis that helps counteract some of the political statements that are coming out of Western civilization, which are so discriminatory and failing to recognize the Western contribution to some of the reasons why people are continually being displaced, as has been previously explained in the first presentation. So I leave those structural and ethical dilemmas about how we help individuals and how we can also be involved with the macro level as being the real challenge for our profession in social work, because we are sitting there listening and hearing these stories. We need to do something with that information, and we need to do it with the people that are experiencing, and because collectively it's a very strong voice. So thank you, and I look forward to hearing the rest and the questions that people have at the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you to Miss Ruth with the very wonderful and give us the new insight. And next, we come to the third speaker, and it's come to Father Johansen. And Father Joe will talking about upholding social work values in refugees protection. To Father Johansen, it's your time.
Thank you. Thank you to all the organisers, especially to Dr. Puji, but to everybody who's involved in this event. It's nice to be around so many social workers. And we come together to acknowledge and celebrate World Refugee Day, though I'm not sure if celebrate is entirely the right word. 122 million forcibly displaced throughout the world, of whom they say nearly 74 million are IDPs. Almost three quarters, not yet, almost three quarters of all refugees come from 5 countries: Afghanistan, Syria, Venezuela, Ukraine, and Palestine. I just want to, as a sidebar, mention the Jesuit who established Jesuit Refugee Service. Next slide, please. And it might give some clues to the kind of values that we take in our service and that might resonate with others. Father Arupe worked in Japan during the Second World War, actually. He wasn't interned, and he was present at Hiroshima when the atomic bomb fell. He had a great hatred of war and saw firsthand the effects of war. And it was he who established our organization, Jesuit Refugee Service, as a result of the Vietnamese boat people and the crisis that was a global crisis at that point, 1980. Coming closer to home in our own region, what's the situation today? We see, for example, Myanmar, next slide please, has over 35 million IDPs and 1.4 million refugees residing in neighboring countries. And Bangladesh hosts over 1 million. UNHCR has reckoned the total number of IDPs and stateless in Myanmar to be about over 4 million. And the outflows have increased. Only the last few months, we've seen hundreds of thousands, more than 100,000 refugees from Myanmar going to Bangladesh, Rohingyas. You would have thought there were very few Rohingyas left in Myanmar, but a lot came recently to Bangladesh. And of course, next slide, please. The Rohingya refugees also travel and travel to your country in Indonesia. As recently as last month in May, UNHCR noted that there were over 427 Rohingyas who perished at sea. Next slide, please. In Asia Pacific, in general, there are 17 million people of concern to UNHCR. And that number, next slide, please, is expected to rise to over 18 million. There's a global refugee crisis, and displacement has caused the highest levels ever seen of refugees and stateless. How has the global North reacted? Next slide, please. It seems to have responded with increasing securitization, criminalization, exclusion, and internalization, even trying to make sure that the so-called problems don't even arise on the shores of their countries. It's a question of building walls, not creating welcome. Behind the data of these huge numbers, as Emily said, are individual stories and suffering, untold numbers of individuals and families whose lives have been torn apart by war, persecution, discrimination, and basic denial of human rights. Next slide, please. Today, we can't celebrate such events, but we do celebrate the resilience, the perseverance, and the hopes of a better future that refugees can have. That's what brings us together. And so it's a proud moment for me at this event, where we can do that in a very relevant, apposite way by appreciating social work values and principles. Social workers are called to respect and protect the dignity and worth of every individual, uphold human rights, work for social justice, and uphold the right to participation and self-determination. And these values represent a bulwark against the false and pernicious tropes and images that we see of refugees and migrants, these images pervading the media and social discourse of today. They seem to suggest that walls are needed rather than welcome, that displaced are a lower class of human being, and that we need to look after our own before we look after others. Next slide, please. In GERES, the organization that I work with, we are working in 8 countries in Asia Pacific. And I want to start with the country where I'm based at the moment, in Thailand. Next slide, please. We have a dilemma here that's been created by a reliance on these kind of false stories. What you see is a refugee camp in northern Thailand, where I worked for some years. You see it's in a forest, it's hidden. It's hidden away, not just literally, but metaphorically. Hidden from even the public. The town that this refugee camp is close to, I would say most of the people there don't realize that there is a refugee camp close by. And in that camp, they recorded no right of movement, no right to employment, no right of access to health or education outside the camps. The camps are managed by refugees themselves, and their leaders have to face the difficulties that come about from that encampment experience. Domestic violence, alcoholism and drug abuse, with children at risk of abuse, exploitation and neglect. They do their best with very limited resources. But the public account of this limbo-like presence is couched in terms of the burdens they put on Thai society, without mentioning any of the likely benefits that could accrue to the state and to the community and to everybody if they had access to work. Because Thailand is a country aging now and in need of labor. However, I have to say, although Thailand is not a signatory to the convention, at ground level, their treatment of Myanmar refugees can be compassionate and caring, even if refoulement is sometimes in evidence. But this crisis in numbers has been exacerbated by the increased violence in Myanmar, the new conscription regulations, and very seriously, the recent government cuts creating uncertainty and chaos amongst humanitarian agencies and threatening health, food and shelter services. In a rare public expression of support for refugee rights, the Bangkok Post, the newspaper here in Bangkok, put it this way in an editorial. For years, Thailand has hosted refugees while keeping them at a distance, relying on foreign aid while avoiding commitment. But the world is changing. International funding is unreliable, and Myanmar's conflict has no clear end. Pretending otherwise will not make the problem disappear. So these refugees and others, other nationalities like Vietnamese, Cambodian, Afghanis, Pakistanis in Thailand, and other refugees in our region have to negotiate a kind of very diverse set of cultures and very diverse set of religions. They have to negotiate what we can call the politics of belonging. Because most ASEAN states don't sign the convention, they refer rather to laws of immigration, and refugees are seen as exceptions to immigration laws. If you migrate to a country and do not follow its rules for entry, you're an illegal migrant. And exceptions are made sometimes in terms of refugee status, but not often. And it's very ad hoc and with little process for resolution or determination. And that perpetuates a refugee's status of being marginalized and being excluded. That's Thailand. Next slide, please. In Malaysia, there are also considerable numbers of refugees, over, I think, close to 200,000 for Myanmar refugees there, plus other nationalities. Next slide, please. Indonesia has some 12,000 refugees from Afghanistan and Myanmar, mostly. And lastly, Bangladesh, next slide, please, has over 1 million refugees from Myanmar, Rohingya refugees. What can we say in the face of that? In JRS, we have these 6 priorities that we try and introduce in our programs and plans. What's important, I think, especially in our event such as today, is the advocacy element, amplifying and raising the voice of refugees in terms of their rights, refugee rights at local, provincial, national, and regional levels. If we adapt the message and identify the targets of messaging, we have to take account of many factors. But one common experience is being careful in explaining what refugee rights may mean. If we talk to an Indonesian parliamentarian, if we talk to a Myanmar displaced community, or if we talk to a Thai overburdened civil servant, they'll all require very different approaches in how we frame our messages. And I think all of the time we would be very careful in avoiding megaphone diplomacy. Next slide, please. This slide is just to underline what we believe to be important in advocacy, and it represents different countries. Next slide, please. We also, particularly in this region of Asia Pacific, have to take account of the disproportionately large number of people affected by the polycrisis of climate change. In our region that hosts half of humanity, we're unduly affected by environmental disasters, and our coastal and island communities are threatened by rising sea levels, to say nothing of how global warming is impacting already high temperatures in the region. And just to give one example, in one index, I think we call it the World Risk Report, Philippines, Indonesia, and India were ranked as the top 3 countries with the highest natural disaster risk-taking rating. With all this in mind, how might social work principles respond? As a starting point, next slide, please, let's reflect on what are defining foundations of the profession. In solidarity with those who are disadvantaged, the profession strives to alleviate poverty, liberate the vulnerable and oppressed, and provide social inclusion and social cohesion. Stressing such positive social work values is also an antidote to the negative stories about migrants and forcibly displaced found in the press and social media. When we see initial reports of refugees as victims, people who've studied this phenomenon notice that, on the other hand, after a while, those stories transition to talk of words like invasion, a flood, suggesting that the arrivals are out of control. And then it's suggested that there's a third level of media disinformation that you can say is a polarized situation where either there's fear and conspiracy theories on one hand, or the stories of success on the other. But in all these transitions, and for much of the media, what's common is the underrepresentation of actual voices of refugees. And what's common is just a socio-political analysis, but a lack of analysis of human rights and refugee law. And it goes even further. If you remember the initial large expulsion of Rohingya in 2018, the special rapporteur for the UN on Myanmar is quoted as saying, "We know that the ultra-nationalist Buddhists have their own Facebooks and are really inciting a lot of violence and a lot of hatred against the Rohingya or other ethnic minorities." So that's the negative effect of media and how social work might try and work against it. Let's look at one thinker who is familiar with social work ethics and morality. And I'm using his quote, which says that social workers change the prevailing global and domestic narratives about migration and displacement. And he calls on them to do that so that we can all respond to the plight of refugees, asylum seekers, migrants, and immigrants with, these are 4 values: hospitality, benevolence, compassion, and action. Hospitality, benevolence, compassion, and action. I'd like to pick up on the hospitality core value because it has an echo in our own organization's strong belief in accompaniment as a value. It's one of 3 values that we say is central to our mission and identity. Accompaniment is a principle and a way of befriending people in need. And it's common to almost all religious traditions and moral thinking, and is parallel to that of hospitality. Accompaniment of the displaced is walking with them on a journey of solidarity, listening to them, supporting their hope, assisting in healing, empowering them in their learning and livelihoods. And because social workers recognize all human beings as moral persons, which in turn suggests some level of recognition of their freedom and equality, it means that social workers have a humanitarian obligation to every human being. And this implies a duty to protect the rights of everyone who lives in our respective countries, regardless of legal status. Next slide, please. Of course, there are many difficulties in helping address the challenges faced by refugees and displaced within Asia Pacific. And we know that the American cuts have caused tremendous negative impacts globally. And they've affected not just the programs that were directly financed by UN, but in a kind of a knock-on effect, there are many other agencies and humanitarian actors that are indirectly affected. And this has caused untold suffering of asylum seekers and refugees in urban areas, in rural areas, in camps, in detention centres. Everywhere there's a refugee or an asylum seeker, there's a desire for freedom and a hope for a better future. But these financial and other difficulties have come to a region where contextual norms of collectivism, as well as the overarching spectre of national security, dominate and impede attempts to bring a rights-based approach to bear. In other words, very often, although we want to use humanitarian values and principles in our discussions, it seems that those discussions are always, if you'll pardon the expression, trumped by national security issues. Next slide, please. But we can align ourselves with other humanitarian and faith-based organizations engaged in refugee support. And I think social workers should try and work with those partners and organizations, because there are many opportunities for collaborative work in research, in fieldwork placements, internships, and in other kinds of work. And most importantly, social workers can help young refugees and displaced negotiate opportunities for the future. I believe that one of Emily's bosses at a very high level, the chairman of the ExCom board for UNHCR, visited Bangladesh and Thailand this last week. And he ended his visit by talking about the bleak future that the cuts bring about. But he said also, in Thailand and Bangladesh, the youth represent the future. We need to invest in them, give them perspective, and help them thrive. There's simply too much at stake to fail. However, on a day like today, it's people like you who've engaged with this event who will slowly but surely bring positive change to your communities and your nations. To quote from a Mozambican revolutionary slogan, "A luta continua," the struggle continues. As a postscript, next slide, please. I don't call these success stories, but I just like to present vignettes of different events and people. Reading from left to right, the first is a group of school children who are having school meals in Myanmar. The second is an elderly asylum seeker in an urban capital who was living before meeting JRS, was living on $1.50 a day with no other source of income. The third slide represents the development of the school system to grades 11 and 12 in a refugee camp run by refugees. The fourth slide is some youth undertaking CPR training in a camp. And the fifth slide represents a Rohingya refugee beside the boat that took him to Aceh a year ago, being welcomed and being accompanied. Thank you for listening. I look forward to your reactions.
Wow. Your presentation, Father Joe, make me speechless, and it's a very give me especially new insight. Okay. Next we come to the fourth speaker, and it comes from Mr. Bagir, and he will talking about or discussing the right to the participation and share the responsibility. To Mr. Bagir, it's your time.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, and thanks to all the other previous speakers. Let me quickly drop a list of resources that I will be talking throughout my presentation, and feel free to engage with these resources as I'm going through my slides. Okay. Hello, everyone. First of all, thank you so much for joining us on a Friday evening, a time that you could easily choose and decide to use to spend with a quality time with your friends and family. And despite all of that possibility, the fact that you are here with us and you're sharing this learning space with us, it means a lot. And also thank you to all the organizers for creating this space where we can learn from each other. And I hope that for the next 14, 15 minutes, I can add a bit of insight to your understanding and build more on whatever amazing stories and impacts that have already been shared by previous speakers. So today, on this important day as World Refugee Day, I plan to talk about a draft independent declaration that affirms the right of refugees and others facing forced displacement or statelessness to actively participate in decisions that affect their lives. And I invite you to share your thoughts, feedback, questions, or reflections towards the end of this session during the Q&A. And I've shared the links in the chat box through which you can access these document that I will be talking about. But before jumping into the details of this document, I just wanted to kind of like to spend a minute or two to talk about why participation is important. And I will try to speak to it in a very simple day-to-day language as I can. I think so participation is important because people, by people, us included as well, like every single human being on this planet. We know what is best for our own lives. And when everyone has a chance to speak and everyone has a chance to be heard, then whatever decisions we take, it becomes fair and more likely impactful. And it also helps to build trust and makes people feel more valued and respected. So to go even a deeper into the understanding of the participation, let me give you a very quick day-to-day example. I am assuming that there's a lot of social workers on this call, but also at the same time, potentially, and I hope that there might be some teachers, or if you're not a teacher, you might have experienced this. Imagine that you are a teacher planning a class trip for your students, but whatever you plan, you do that without asking the students what they might choose, without asking them for a place that they want to go there, and without asking for their interest. Imagine the impact and the result of that, and imagine a different scenario when you ask the students to help plan the trip. Ask them, what is your favorite food that you want to eat? Ask them, what is your favorite site that you want to visit? And what are the favorite activities you want to do? Then the impact of that or the result of that is going to be very, very, very different. And the students are going to be more excited and they're going to be engaged because their ideas are heard. And that is the power of participation. So you basically created a space for these people and your students to to participate in decisions and share their thoughts. Now multiply that role of participation, that effect to a very high level, and imagine an impact and imagine the effect of that on your movement. For example, imagine when other people decide what you're allowed to do. Imagine other people deciding where you can go, if you're allowed to go to leave the home or not, if you're allowed to leave the city or not. And imagine when other people decide what you can earn, when you can earn, and how you can earn. And that is happening with many communities around the world, especially refugees and others affected by forced displacement or statelessness. A lot of decisions about refugees are being taken by the government, by different institutions, without allowing these people to participate in those decisions. And that is what I'm going to talk about, because we have been working for some time to to think what could be a solution to create spaces for more participation. And I hope that through the next few slides, I paint some understanding and build more on these understanding about the participation. So now let me go a bit to the details of this. And let me talk about who we are. So we are an international working group of refugee experts, academics, humanitarians, and international lawyers, and each of us bring a diverse set of expertise and perspectives to the discussion and the planning and the work that we are doing collectively. And everyone is very dedicated to establishing the participation of refugees and others affected by forced displacement or statelessness in decisions that impact their lives as a fundamental human right, rather than just an inspiration. So what we are trying to do is we are trying to to set these framework that participation should be a human right as education is, and so that all of the decisions that impact the refugees have to say it into that. And this initiative is co-owned and co-led by all individual institutional members of these working group across Asia Pacific. We have members from Asia Pacific, but also at the same time, we have members from other regions. We have members from the Europe region and Americas region. And I have the privilege of serving as a secretariat of the working group, where my role is to help facilitate collaboration and coordination, our collective efforts, and also external engagement and advocacy. So our objective is that through this initiative, we aim to address a very critical gap in international law and policy regarding meaningful refugee participation by establishing an independent declaration. And this independent declaration affirms and confirms the right of refugees and others facing forced displacement or statelessness to actively participate in decisions that affect their lives, so that through that work, we can reinforce refugee participation as both a legal and normative right. And this document is it doesn't say what the law is. It basically outlines and demonstrates what the law should be. And our goal is to promote best practices, provide clear, actionable guidance and framework for governments, UN bodies, social workers, and other stakeholders to support and facilitate meaningful refugee participation. It's not only confined within the refugee area; it can also be used with all of the different communities that you can work. And you will see that a lot of articles that I will be going into details of this, they are very general and it can be applied to all different communities. And we hope that these declaration can lead to a global displacement response or a response in general that is accountable, that is transparent, that is sustainable, and that is grounded in the lived experiences of the people that you are working with. To give you a bit of current perspective. With many years of sustained local community driven advocacy, there has been, especially refugee community, there has been a growing recognition of the importance of ensuring meaningful refugee participation in recent years. For example, we have seen that there's been a lot of talk and discussions in UNHCR meetings on a global level, national level, and regional level. We have seen that there are a lot of governments. They're creating and building advisory boards and committees. We've seen that participation has been included in refugee settlements, and one important and very well credible source that talks about the importance of refugee participation is the Global Compact on Refugees. Global Compact on Refugees, it's endorsed by 181 countries in December 2018, and that confirms that responses to refugee crisis are most effective when they actively involve and meaningfully engage those they seek to protect and assist. However, like other relevant international instruments, it falls short of providing actionable steps for implementation or establishing explicit obligations on the governments and to enable this inclusion. And despite all of these developments, the international legal frameworks do not currently address this issue in full, which means it is leaving a huge gap in international law when it comes to protection of refugees and others facing displacement. Interestingly, when you look at the current international law framework, go beyond refugees, you will find that right of participation has been embedded in different instruments. Like, for example, what you're seeing on the screen, it is the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And in that UN declaration, it's said that indigenous peoples have the right to participate in decision-making in all the matters that are affecting their lives. And also in Article 19, it says that all states and governments shall consult and cooperate in good faith with the indigenous people, especially when it comes to the decisions that affect them. And also similarly, when you look at the Convention on the Right of Persons with Disabilities, you can find that it says that the states, parties, or governments shall closely consult with and actively involve persons with disabilities, including children with disabilities, through their representative organizations. So it talks about the value and importance of representation and participation. And similarly, when you look at the Convention on the Rights of the Child, same thing you can find it there. Like, for example, all state parties shall assure to the child who is capable of forming his or her own views the right to express those views freely in all matters affecting the child. Now, the problem comes when once a displaced child turns 18, that right of participation completely disappears. Like, if you are below 18, according to the international law, you have the right to participate in decisions that affect you. But when you turn 18, immediately that it just disappears. And then there is no explicit mention that right for displaced adults to be heard in international refugee and human rights law. And the same is true for displaced and stateless people as well, who are above 18 and don't have the disabilities. Like, for example, if you are an adult, a refugee, and you are not a disabled, you don't have any disability, and you are above 18, you don't basically have any right or any law that talks about your participation, protects that. And as you can see that under the international law framework, right to participation in some decisions have already been mentioned. However, the international framework currently does not offer any comprehensive and explicit coverage for the participation of refugees and others experiencing forced displacement. Now, this is where we are. Like, if you look, based on all of these, what I just shared, in a more general human rights international law framework, right to participation in some decisions have been mentioned, which means there is some existence about the value of the participation. And there are acknowledgement of the value of refugee participation coming from Global Compact of Refugees. However, all of these fall short of providing actionable steps when it comes to implementation of this participation. And that is why what we are trying to propose. So our proposal is very simple. First of all, over the past 1 year, we have undertaken a series of inclusive and participatory workshops with the group of experts that I was just talking about, including monthly virtual sessions, and we recently had one in-person convening to co-develop these draft of the independent declaration. This draft, it has 5 articles, and I will try to speak to each article one by one. But because this document is very inclusive, and covers refugees and others experiencing forced displacement, it may also be relevant to some of our fellow social workers that are present on this call. And I hope that it come across relevant. So the article number 1, as you can see on the screen, it talks about the freedom of every individual under international human rights law. And through this article, we demand that everyone has the right, every human being has the right to participate in decisions that affect them directly or indirectly. Therefore, it is important to fully enable the rights of refugees and others experiencing displacement or statelessness to support governments and other decision-making authorities with effective and sustainable decision-making on issues relating to the displacement or statelessness. It can also go beyond that as well. Article number 2 aims to create an obligation on governments and other decision-making authorities to guarantee the effectiveness of that right. So in Article 1, we say that participation is a human right, but sometimes participation happens, it just like because they want to, decision-making authorities, they want to show something or they are not doing it in good faith. So that's why this article is very important. To ensure that participation is meaningful and not simply a tick box exercise or a tool used to justify decisions made without considerations of the views of refugees and others experiencing forced displacement or statelessness. This article also ensures inclusivity of background, gender, age, or status for equal and meaningful participation. And article number 3, in article number 3, we try to use the basis of the current recognition of international human rights on the right to seek and receive information of all kinds. So if you want some people to participate, you must provide every kind of information that the people or community needs to make a decision. And that's why we emphasize that all decision-making authorities must provide refugees and others experiencing forced displacement or statelessness with timely, accessible information necessary for informed participation. And the right to seek and receive information is a necessary element for participation because access to information is critical. If you don't know what you're talking about, what the decision is about, you can't really participate. And if you invite someone to a meeting without giving them all the complete information and the data, that participation is just tokenistic. It's not meaningful. And article number 4 talks about, in article number 4, we ensure that appropriate support and resourcing is integral to the fulfillment of the right of participation. As you all may have seen too often that refugees and also other affected communities, organizations, and leaders, they are invited to participate in decision-making processes, but without effective resourcing and support. Like these communities, if they are coming to your decision-making spaces, they either, for example, they might need language support, they might need financial support, they might need visa support, any kind of support that they are needing. It's the obligation of that decision-making authority to facilitate that support. And also affected community-led organizations are often criticized for not adequately representing their communities, but at the same time, they are not supported to properly establish representative mechanisms within the communities. And that's why this article acknowledges that if participatory mechanisms are to overcome tokenism, they must be appropriately resourced and address the practical barriers that affected communities face in exercising their right to participate. And last article, in this last article, we try to emphasize the need for an effective accountability framework to address situations where governments and other decision-making authorities don't provide for meaningful participation. Accountability, it's very important because it requires the governments and other decision-making authorities to take appropriate measures to uphold the rights and principles set out in this decision. Like, for example, if there is, not only talking about the government, if a decision-making authority is not involving you in a meaningful way to participate in decision-making, then there has to be a mechanism and framework that I, as a refugee, can hold that decision-making body accountable why you didn't do that. So this article it emphasizes on that, and this is all of these articles are is just in simple language is what we're trying to kind of like propose is participation should be a human right. It has to be done in good faith. Participation needs to be resourced, and all of the information, relevant information, needs to be provided to the people, and there has to be accountability mechanism. And we want participation through these 5 articles. We want participation as a legal and normative right. And last thing is, as I mentioned earlier today, or maybe I not, we basically, this is the very first day of these declaration that we have, declaration draft that we have launched publicly. For the past 1 year, we have been just working on this internally. So now we are at a very important milestone. We have just launched it on a public and around the world to invite feedback from all the other people. And we are planning to receive feedback from all actors, including yourself on this call, up until 20th of August. And after that, we will incorporate all of those feedbacks into the independent declaration, and then we will have the final version of it. And then we will kind of like start lobbying with different stakeholders and governments. And these QR code that you can see on your screen, you can access the draft declaration through these QR code. You can also access the draft declaration through the links that I provided in the chat box. And you can also find the email address in the chat box through which you can share your feedback. You can also, there's a link for anonymous feedback. So that would be all from me. And but I'll really look forward to answering any questions during Q&A. And I'm so sorry that I spoke 4 minutes over my allowed time. Thank you so much, Ibu Siri. Back to you.
Wow, thank you, Mr. Bagir. It's a very, very interesting presentation, and it's give me a lot of insight and information. And what I get from your presentations, because we are as human being, even we cannot give help or aid, our voice can give help for them who need it. Yeah, I think our voice is needed. So one voice is better than nothing. Isn't right, Mr. Bagir?
You
Yes.
just beautifully summarized my 19 minutes of presentation into one sentence. Thank you so much. You did well.
You're welcome, Mr. Bagir. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, we come to the last speaker, and it's the 5th speaker. It's come from Mr. Teguh, and he will highlight the local and academic responses to refugee needs in Aceh. To Mr. Teguh, it's your time.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Good evening, everyone. Honorable all of speaker and participant for joining the Zoom lecture series tonight. Thank you, moderator. Let me present my PPT. My detail about the Aceh, Rohingya, and social work intervention. Aceh is one of province in Indonesia, in Sumatra Island. Hundred of Rohingya refugees landed in Lok Sumawe with different groups arriving in July and September. The group on September, including women, men, and children. Support and assistance, the Aceh government, community, and their staff were prepared to assist the stranded Rohingya refugee. Okay, next, please. A location of Rohingya refugee shelter in Aceh, one in Minaraya. Minaraya is in PD district, one of the many refugee camp for Rohingya that provides shelter and access to basic services. Another one in the, Lok Sumawe city, location with facilities renovated by IOM to standard of decent temporary shelter. And another one in Kuala Cangkoi, Aceh Utara, Aceh North District. The local government provides shelter with support from various professions, including social workers. Okay, next. Okay, right, this is cultural conflict of the Rohingya between Aceh people and the Rohingya. Interaction between the Rohingya refugee and the Acehese people in Aceh revealed several cultural conflict, similarity and misunderstanding. Yeah, similarity, we are in the same religion, Muslim, yeah. But despite some of similarities in cultural expression, the Rohingya refugees sometimes behave like uninvited guests, showing intimacy while also demanding the thing in manner contrary to Acehese culture. Challenge in adoption, but in meal time often lead to conflict between the refugee due to difficulties in regulating their behavior, especially in terms of speaking ethic, contrasting with the local custom. Behavioral difference, the Rohingya behavior perceived as rude in their interaction, conflicted with the norm of Acehese and Indonesian culture. Okay, some incident and resistance. Instance of refugee fleeing and showing resistance to authority, such as damaging property to escape, ignoring instruction, and non-compliance with the departure regulation. Okay, next. Okay, social work plays a crucial role in facilitating the integration of the Rohingya community in Aceh, addressing both their immediate need and long-term adoption challenge. Effective social work intervention can enhance the resilience of the Rohingya refugee, fostering their integration into Acehese society while addressing the psychological trauma they have experienced. Social work practitioners must be culturally sensitive and aware of unique challenges faced by the Rohingya, including their traumatic past and the need for community support. By employing tailored strategies, social workers can promote a healing and facilitate meaningful connection between the Rohingya and the Acehese people. Moreover, fostering dialogue and understanding between this community is essentially to mitigate culture conflict and enhance mutual support, ultimately leading to a more harmonious consistent. Okay, next. Promoting cultural exchange program and community engagement initiative can further strengthen the bond between the Rohingya and Acehese population, fostering a sense of belonging and mutual respect. Such initiative can help bridge cultural gaps and enhance cooperation, ultimately benefiting both community in their shared pursuit of stability and peace. Next, please. Okay, additionally, ongoing training for social worker in cultural competency is vital for effectively addressing the specific needs of the Rohingya community and promoting successful integration into Acehese society. This training should focus on understanding the cultural difference and similarity, particularly the shared religious value that can facilitate better relationship between the Rohingya and Acehese community. By recognizing and respecting the shared value, social worker can help build trust and rapport, paving the way for collaborative effort that address the challenge faced by the both group. Next. Okay, this is the role responsibility of international social worker. This is what we do some research about the refugee. The first one, protection of human rights, and second, service coordination. We know that we need more coordination between government agency, NGOs, and local community for integrated support. Also, psychosocial support, not only social worker, we also need psychology and another relation sign to help the refugee. And another thing is multicultural services, adjusting social intervention of the cultural context and norm of foreign refugee. Next. Yeah, we get some challenge in social work service, especially in Aceh. Social rejection. Why I said that social rejection? Because some of Aceh people rejected the refugee. Why they rejected? Because like speaker mentioned before, social media. Social media is very, very influenced about the situation and information about the refugee in Aceh. Another challenge is resource limitation, facilities and workforce that are still inadequate for the need of the refugee complex. Cross-sector coordination, like I mentioned before, the obstacle is related to synchronizing between government bodies, NGO, and international institutions. And the last one is trauma management. As we know that many of refugee, they get some violence in the ocean because we don't know how to say, but there's something violence happened in the ocean. That's why we need to trauma management. Okay. Can go next. Yeah. The integration of Rohingya refugee into Aceh society is facilitated through a combination of social work practice, community solidarity, and local wisdom. This intervention aims to address the refugee basic need while promoting cultural understanding and social cohesion. Social work practice and community support. A global protection cluster approach. This is framework emphasizes collaboration among stakeholders, including the Indonesian government, to ensure the protection and assistance of a refugee. And this is cited by Rahman. And the second, globe Ta'awun principle. Ta'awun principle is the Islamic value of mutual assistance has been actively practiced in Aceh. Ta'awun is mean one of letter in the mentioned in the Quran. Completely wata'awanu alal birri wat taqwa. For the Muslim people, we have to help each other, not only for the Muslim, also for another religion. This is ta'awun principle, basically this Islamic value. And Aceh's people believe that Islamic value about the ta'awun principle. Okay, the next. Yeah, it is my conclusion. International social worker play a vital role in providing service to foreign refugees in Aceh. Cross-sector collaboration and an ethical approach are key to the success of the service. Social and resource challenges demand innovative strategies and enhanced capability. Social work practice in Aceh integrate local wisdom into educational program and protection policy, fostering cultural understanding and community participation. And the last one conclusion, social work practice facilitate Rohingya integration through community engagement, cultural preservation program, and tailored support for acculturation. Okay, it's all, moderator, and go back to you. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, Mr. Teguh. Okay, all the participants in this webinar, it's our time to entering the next session. It's the Q&A section. And anyone who wants to asking the questions for all the speaker, you can give the raise hand. And I will choose one by one. Okay, we still waiting, all speakers. Maybe I will ask the question first if all of you do not mind, because we're still waiting. Yeah, thank you. First of all, I want to say thank you for all the speakers and all the topic is very interesting. And I really interesting and want to ask to Father Joe. In your PPT, you said that refugees can be happen because of disaster or something happen in this world. As we know, Indonesia is the nation who has a lot of earthquake, a lot of disaster in here, especially lately in Cianjur, and it's make a lot of refugees. But if you know, the refugees, it's the people become of some situation. How about the Cianjur people who become refugees because of the disaster, but they still live in the same place? Can you give us the situations like this?
Thank you for that. Yes, I think there's an appreciation globally of Asia Pacific's disaster risk, and Indonesia, of course, shares that at a very high level. You asked the question, what happens to people who become affected by climate change, natural disasters,
Yes.
but who don't move from their homes?
Yeah, they're still in the same place.
Yeah. Well, I guess technically we don't call them forcibly displaced, but they bear the consequences of what has happened. I mean, sometimes that disaster might affect their livelihoods, might affect the facilities that they have, might affect the fabric of that society. And I suppose it depends on how responsive local government and NGOs and community-based organizations are in being able to help build a response. I mean, presumably, staying in a place is a better option than being forced to leave. So to that extent, the disaster or the event has not caused people to leave, but so that's one advantage. But there may be other consequences, and hopefully communities and local structures and local organizations and local authorities can help mitigate the effects of that. I don't know if any of the other panel members want to comment, but that's what I would say.
Okay,
In other words, because leaving home is very traumatic. I mean, being forced to leave home.
Yeah.
And if that doesn't happen, then that's a good thing in itself.
Yeah. And by the way, Father Joe, have you ever giving help with this condition, like in Cianjur, maybe in Indonesia, like I said, in your country, and maybe the programs that you ever do?
Yeah.
Same like us?
Yes, I think GRS is kind of responsive to those situations because often people are forced to move. I think when I worked in Africa, what I remember most clearly is the Goma earthquake. But more recently and closer to home, GRS is helping in a small way in earthquake responses in Mandalay and Sagaing in Myanmar. And in terms of Indonesia, yes, I'm not sure about the details. Our country director might be able to give an answer to that, but GRS works where people are in need. It doesn't work so much by legal definitions. If people become de facto refugee, even if they don't fulfill the legal requirements, then we would want to help.
Okay. Okay, Father, thank you very much for your explanation, and it's give me a new sign again. Okay, maybe MC can help me to see the participant who want to ask.
Yes, Miss Sri, there
Yes.
is something, some message in the chat box in the Zoom.
Okay.
From Widya Setiabudi.
Okay, wait a minute. Widya Setiabudi for Cianjur case, isn't it?
Yep.
Okay, from Widya Setiabudi, I will read it. For Cianjur case, they are called internally displaced people. Okay. And it makes a difference because IDPs are still the responsibility of the state by law. They have citizenship and associated right entailed with it. Okay. Thank you, Widya. Okay. Other question maybe? The committee can help me?
Yes, there is one more question on the chat box from Rahma Safitri.
Okay, from Rahma Safitri, thank you for all the speakers. I have questions. What approaches can be taken to bridge the cultural gap causing conflict between Indonesians as the asylum country and refugee? Okay, speakers who want to answer the question from Rahma Safitri? Okay, Mr. Bagir. You can give your answer, please.
I can give a quick answer, but other speakers, please feel free to jump in and add more to that. I think I would Rahma, I would come back to you like asking you if if you wanted to build a connection between two Indonesians, what would you do? I think you would bring them together. You would facilitate conversations with them. You would create an environment where they can talk and learn from each other. That is exactly like what you can do to bridge the gap between local people and refugees. We're all human beings. We bring our stories, we bring our experiences, we bring our expertise, and we can only form or bridge that gap, the cultural gap or the lack of understanding, if we have a space, a safe space where we can connect, we can learn from each other, we can share our stories. There are so many refugees who would love to hear to learn basically your the language, to discuss about the national politics, or to discuss anything that's like local cultural. But unfortunately, because there's not a lot of spaces where that can happen, and that's why the breach and the gap between the nation community and also refugees is kind of like getting bigger and bigger. In addition to creating that space, I think language is also a a big challenge. Like if you play a role to bridge that gap, I think it's also your responsibility to consider like what kind of challenge, language barriers there might be, either from the international side or from the refugee side. And if you have resources, please facilitate that. If you don't have resources, again, coming back to the right of participation, discuss with each communities, how can they add value to that? There is already interest. It's just like lack of resources, lack of spaces. And I think with goodwill and good faith, if somebody can take leadership to bring these two communities together, either if it can be like a cup of coffee in a coffee shop, or it can be like inviting people to a wedding, or it can be like inviting a refugee-led learning center to a university that you're teaching, all of them serve the purpose, and all of them will bring eventually both communities together. That would be all. Thanks.
I'd like to add to that, because I agree with everything you said, but I think there are some very specific, simple tasks that people can do, and that is to bring people together to speak with each other about their own stories, because that's a way of establishing a relationship between people. And actually, what this whole business about social cohesion is about is actually people accepting each other, being comfortable with each other, getting to know each other. I think the other thing that we have skirted around but haven't talked about is the right to work. That if you are going into a new culture, into a new situation, you want to belong in some way. Work is a wonderful way of getting to know people, of being accepted, of actually being a task. You're given a task to do, and in doing that, you build up reciprocity. And reciprocity is really important in terms of making good, healthy relationships, so that governments, and there are many around the world, who refuse the right to work for displaced people, are building up problems. So one of the things that we can all do collectively is to approach our governments and say, this is actually hindering the task that we have rather than helping it. So there's an individual level of getting people together over a cup of tea, a cup of coffee, or whatever. And then there's the other one, which is about saying, hey, the right to work is really important, and we need workers. We need people to come and do things and support each other. And that's the idea of Ubuntu, of Bon Vivre. And I've noticed there was an Islamic, mutual assistance. And I think these principles govern not just social work, not just refugees, not just, and they're for all of us. And I think one of the messages of things like People's Charter, and indeed coming from the declaration today, is a need to recognize that we all have something to contribute. We've got skills. In 2015, in Germany, I was delighted to hear that what helped in some of the situation was to recruit social workers from the refugee population, of the immigrant population. Immediately they had a role, and it was using the skills they already had. How stupid of it is it to exclude people from being able to contribute to our communities what is really that they already have those skills. So, you know, it's not rocket science. It's about how we help cohesion happen in a very normal, interactive way, one human with another, several humans, communities with each other. So, you know, these are simple things. They don't need resources. They need a mindset. So that's my contribution to how you might do that.
Thank you, Miss Ruth. Another speaker who want to giving the answer, maybe Mr. Tuku or Father Joe, please.
Well, I was just going to say very short. I agree entirely with what's just been said and underline it. Maybe just to add, listening is a very important thing to do. It's part of our human interaction, but to be better listeners might be also a good target for us to aim at. To listen to what is said and to listen to what isn't said. And you know, the speaker discussing interaction between Rohingyas and Achinese mentioned cultural differences. Often these are not well articulated, if they're articulated at all, but they're cultural ways of doing things. People sometimes don't even know why or how they're doing it, but it's just the way they are. And if we become more attentive to what is happening in that space, that will help us be better listeners, and it'll also help us to relate better. And I agree also very much with what was said about finding a space, finding an accepted space for both groups or both individuals, a common space that can be seen as safe and a place where that kind of listening and that kind of interaction and human relationship can build. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Father Joe. Maybe Mr. Teku want to giving your opinion?
Yeah, I just say it's not like easy thing, yeah. I just give the example in Aceh. Before 2020, all of the Aceh people accept all of the Rohingya refugee when they came to Aceh. They accept it. But after 2022, some of the Aceh people, they rejected the refugee. The question is why before 2020 they accept and after 2022 they rejected. It's some of the media opinion, social media is really influenced about the situation. The actually is the Islamic value when the Aceh people believed it, ta'awun principle. In Islamic value, we have to help each other, not only for the Muslim people, also for the another religion. That the value we need to, how to say, we need to share more to another people. And another one thing is in Aceh we have to like the big problem before in Aceh, tsunami and conflict. Because of tsunami and conflict in Aceh, uh, we we have to care about the humanitarian situation. We have to care about the problem, social problem, disaster and conflict. I mean in my opinion, we have do more collaboration. We have do more connection, and we can share more to how to say to help each other about the refugee issue. Okay, that out.
Okay, thank you all the speaker. Rahma giving the response. She said thank you to all of you. Thank you so much for the answer. It means a lot for me, said Rahma. Okay, any question? Maybe steering committee can help me to see if there is any question again. Okay, just reminding, this session, question and answer will be end at 20:15. So we still have 10 minutes more. So I hope all the audience give your best question because it's your time.
Could I ask a question, please?
Okay, okay, Miss Ruth.
Yeah, the question is really to everyone about that. We've talked a lot about what happens to individuals, but you know, in the presentation about the refugee camp in Thailand, the picture stays with me as I think about Nakavali and I think about some of the camps in Jordan that I've been to, and I wonder how we can work together to change this, because this has been with us for over 100 years, basically, these camps, and they're complete violation of people's human rights. They're economically divisive, and they are culturally divisive. And we've had the UN involvement for decades, but I don't see any change. But I think it's a global responsibility that we should be working towards some change in this. And I'm wondering if anybody has any kind of ideas about what we can do together to actually bring about that kind of change, because it affects millions of people and they are our brothers and sisters. We need to be thinking about how we address that terrible offensive behavior towards other people. So that's my question.
Okay, maybe other speaker want to respond what Miss Ruth said.
Sorry, go on.
If I can quickly answer that. I appreciate your perspective, but also I want to acknowledge that I'm not expert in detention or alternative detention. But I will comment on that question from policy perspective, and I think the problem. I mean, detention. Let's all of us agree that detention is a problem. As you mentioned it very accurately, it's a violation of human rights. And I've spoke with refugee fellows who have lived like for many years in the camps in Thailand, and I'm in constant engagement with refugee fellows in the camps in Bangladesh. And looking and understanding them, and I personally living somewhere as a refugee in Indonesia, I appreciate the flexibility of the Indonesian government that they've provided to us. So I think from looking at this issue from a policy perspective, I think the problem comes between when there is a lack of political interest, and when there is absence of communication between Indonesian government, I mean not Indonesian government, but any government, and the refugee communities. And I think that is why what we are trying to do through that independent declaration is to find the gap in international law, to find the gray areas, to find loopholes, so we can use that to kind of like to reach out to these government and to draw connection between the communities, refugee communities, and the government, so they can talk with each other. And then we want to through that we want to put refugees on the driving seat of advocating for their rights. We want to put refugee communities in spaces where they can directly engage with different organizations and governments to kind of like to talk about the impact that is having, I mean, these detention, many years of living in detention is having on their lives, and also talk about what kind of benefits they can provide to the host community and to the government if they come out of the detention centers. But unfortunately, there is no goodwill there. The absence of the goodwill, the absence of like the framework, the absence of the inclusion of refugees and affected communities in the discussions that in the spaces, in the rooms where all of these important discussions are happening. I think these are all contributing to that problem. These are all kind of like contributing to the constant continuous existence of these prison, basically. And I think if that space is created, if there's a good fit of inclusion and refugees are included in those discussions, I hope that will lead to some sort of like change in any country, but also at the same time adding to the global impact.
Okay, thank you for your response, Mr. Bagir. Okay, Father Joe, please.
Thank you. That was a very provocative question. I'm sure it was done on purpose. I think the trouble is that there's a whole range of options of how governments and international communities have looked at what encampment means. I mean, slightly different to detention. Some of it can be mildly benevolent. Some of it can be less benevolent. Some of it can be malevolent. And I think if you just blanket all together under, let's get rid of refugee camps, you're, in a sense, you're undermining the movement that already exists in some countries for having a relatively beneficial approach to encampment. In other words, you don't want the situation all or nothing, because I mean, in reality, that's not what happens. I don't know, an extreme form of kind of imprisonment rather than encampment might be something like Malaysia's response many years ago to the Vietnamese arrivals, or Hong Kong. And then you have other countries that don't adopt encampment, but they're really quite disrespectful in terms of refugee rights for refugees that don't have to live in a camp. But living in a camp might be a better option than living outside of a camp in some of those countries where life is pretty hard. I mean, I'm thinking of South Africa as one example. At independence, South Africa opted not to it had quite a benign refugee act. But actually, in practice, the way refugees are marginalized and targeted, actually, the xenophobia is really, really extreme in that country. And it's difficult for refugees, actually, ironically, it's difficult for them to find a safe space. So they live in some sections of town where they're gathered together, but outside of that, living outside can be very, very difficult and very dangerous because they're targeted by neighbors. So I think we have to take each case as it is and not say blanket, we're going to close all refugee camps and then the problem is solved.
Okay, thank you, Father Joe. Maybe Mr. Teku want to add the answer from Miss Ruth?
Yeah, I don't know the answer exactly that question, but I just say as academician, I can teach my teacher and I can do some research, and I think we can do more collaboration in the future. Yeah, like I mentioned before, this is not easy thing, but we can do even small thing together to just say something about the refugee. I think it's better to say something. Okay, get up.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Teguh. Okay, all speakers, there is one question from Secretariat. And the question says, granted that refugee rights remain intact, but the multilateralism is massively disrupted and might radically be altered. In which way the Refugee Convention might need to change? Anyone to answer this question?
Ibu Sri, just to clarify, this question comes from Pak Puji himself.
Okay. It's from Mr. Puji. Thank you, Mbak Disha. Mr. Isrut, give the option.
I was just going to comment that one of the ways that I have been concerned about the Refugee Convention is the way that it actually only refers and relates to refugees. There are many, many more displaced people, and they are in a much more precarious position actually than refugees. And so I think it is time for review. I would agree with the comment there, because I think it needs to reflect the reality of where we are now, because we have much more recognition of people being displaced, not just by conflict, but by climate change and other things that are going on in the world. And so I would agree, yes, I would agree that I think it's time for us to have a good look at what the convention says and to perhaps refocus on what are the needs of displaced people, and to have a realistic global discussion about how we can address some of the issues that we've been talking about.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Ruth, for your response. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, all the participants, maybe it's the end of the webinar. And before we closing the webinar, let me give some conclusion or summary for all the speakers, because it's all talking about the social worker. The summary that I can give that upholding social work values in refugee protection means not only providing temporary assistance, but also creating a just human environment that support recovery and a better future for them. Social workers serve as agent of change, bringing hope and justice to those who have been displaced from their homeland. And then I want to make the strengthness that, like what I said in Mr. Bagir time, that one voice is better than nothing. Okay, that's that I can give the conclusion for tonight. And I want to close the webinar, and unexpectedly time flies so fast.
Can we suggest that each of the speakers give the last words, please?
Okay, please. Before I close the webinar, maybe it's starting from, I have to choose or voluntary for the speaker, or from Miss Ruth, maybe you will give the.
I think I would want to finish by saying that I think it's really important that we take on board that it isn't just social workers and refugees and displaced people that are concerned about this, but we have to engage with financiers, we need to engage with politicians, we need to engage with health professionals, we need to engage with, above all, local communities, because at the end of the day, it is the local communities who are hosting the displaced people. And I think we really need to widen the way that we think and be creative in the way that we think and the way that we work with people. And I think that for me, in my opening things, I was talking about, the Western dominance of talking about the needs of the individual. But actually, I think the world has, in other regions, has a different kind of focus, which I think the West needs to learn from, which is about the strength and the importance of communities. So it's about working together. It's about Ubuntu. It's about I am because we are. I think we need to move forward in a spirit of we can solve this together, and we're better working together than if we work separately.
Okay, thank you, Miss Ruth. And maybe I will invite to Miss Emily to give the final reflection for tonight, please.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Final reflection, just it was a lovely evening. I'm really grateful to have met and listened to all the speakers, and grateful to all the organizers for bringing us together. I think, I think these are big problems. These are big problems, and we only benefit from listening to each other, from hearing different perspectives, from the skills and abilities and thoughts and unique talents of so many people across society. So I think it's great to have these kind of discussions. I just one point I'd like to reiterate, just from some of the comments tonight, that displacement, yes, is a big broad term, and we heard the numbers, 122, 123 million. Refugees, the focus of this discussion, refugees are distinct. They're not migrants. They're not internally displaced people. They're not people that have been displaced by climate. They're not people who've been displaced by natural disaster. A refugee is distinct, and in my mind, really requires a special protection, because what makes a refugee is that they have fled their country and they have lost the most basic protection that your government provides for you. And we all know what our governments do for us. They give us our birth certificate. They help us show that we've been married. They help us access school. They let us access health services. They care for us when we're falling through the nets. So refugees have lost that protection. So I just think it somehow waters down a bit their need for protection and their need for our sort of collective efforts when we don't remind ourselves of that. And I think that's also an important point when we talked about Aceh, and we talk about how we address sometimes the misunderstandings and misperceptions, is we need to continue to speak and educate each other and learn from each other, and remember sort of the special protections that refugees around the world require. So just to make that last point. Thanks very much.
Okay. Next, maybe Father Joe can give final reflection.
Thank you. I'm very grateful for this event and for us being together. I think it's a good example of people coming together with a common spirit, humanitarian driven, and we listened to each other. We know, as Emily just said, the problem is are very big, but that shouldn't deter us from making small steps. And I think this networking, this coming together, builds on our own motivation, and it also builds on our skills and knowledge, for which I'm grateful. Thank you all. And I think it's a way of offering for the future some signs of hope. And it's a way of countering the misinformation, and it's a way of saying what we know to be the kind of values that mark us out as better human beings.
Okay, thank you, Father Joe. And the next final reflection given from Mr. Teku, please.
Okay, I will share shortly. Today, I'm a academician. Tomorrow, a refugee. When we talk about refugee, we talk about ourselves. Thank you very much.
Okay, short but it's meaningful. And the last final reflection from Mr. Bagir, please, it's your time.
I love that framing, Patiku. It's wonderful, powerful. Thank you for saying that. I think my final reflection would be if all of us can end this call with one understanding, that tomorrow that we are going to have a meeting, and that meeting, if before tomorrow we had 2 people on the meeting around the table, tomorrow we come to it with an intention of, with that discussion, who else we are affecting, with that decision, who else we are affecting, and ask ourselves this question: do we have a representation of that person on this table or not? If you don't have the representation, it is better for us to ensure the participation of that person into the discussion, and then we can continue with that discussion. And also a discussion of how can that collaboration can be based on trust, transparency, accountability, and also shared understanding of like the cultures, the stories, the problems. I think as it's been shared, like the problem that we are facing, it's global, it's very big, and the only way for us that we can solve this problem is by bringing everyone together. Whole of society approach is the only sustainable way of moving forward, and it's the right time to ask, who are we missing from the table, around the table, and how can we include that? So I would end there. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
And now, Mbak Sri is from me. This is Puji.
Okay, please, Mr.
All
Puji.
right. Maybe I would like to contribute as last words. I realize that we are talking about, as you all say, an enormously large topic. And perhaps there is a wisdom to slice it the way that we can handle it. At a global level, from social work perspective, Ruth, I would love to have a global level conversation from social work's perspective with refugee community and ask that hard question. Given today's circumstances, how would that convention will change from our perspective? I understand the politicians have to discuss it later, but we could reflect as a profession. Father Joe, at the regional level, I think we are facing Asia Pacific, facing enormous situation too. I would love to engage in a conversation at the regional level with you, with refugee community, with regard to the hotspots in the region and what will be the underlying potential solution to that. At the national level, Emily, Mas Bagir, Tengku, I think we could discuss how social work as a profession, as group of profession, could work with refugee community, right? I think it's time for us to look at the local solutions because the global one might get stuck for some time. And yet our colleague need to, the children of refugees need to study. The women they need to get busy with their life and so on. So those are local solutions. Finally, colleagues, thank you very much for joining in this conversation. We look forward to the follow-up of that. Appreciate it very much of the diligent preparation and beautiful delivery. Mbak Sri, thank you for that. Suhaila, thank you for being a very capable first-timer. And kudos to Tisha. With that, I end. Thank you very much. Over to you, Mbak Sri.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Puji. And please, we close the committee. Can we close the webinar or still continuing?
Yeah, Ibu Sri, it should be continued with Suhaila.
Yeah, you
Okay.
can hand it to me.
Okay. Maybe before I give to MC, I want to say thank you for all the speakers. Because from 5 speakers, and especially all the participants will have I believe they get new perspective. The latest informations also provides an overview of what step we should the next I mean. Okay, and to all the webinar participants, thank you for the participating in this event. And last, I give this event back to MC, to Mbak MC, I mean, I give this time for you. Thank you.
All right, thank you to our moderator and all the speakers. What an engaging and insightful session we just had. Ladies and gentlemen, as we come to the end of this special sessions of the Social Work International Lecture Series, I want to take a moment to say thank you from all us on the organizing team to each and every one of you. Tonight's sessions was a powerful reminder of why we gather on World Refugee Day. Through the voice of our speakers, we were reminded that the journey of supporting refugees, it's not about protection. It's not about only the protections, but about restoring dignity, building resilience, and promoting genuine inclusions. Our deepest thanks go to Miss Emily Bojovic. Thank you so much for sharing global and regional insight from UNHCR. Miss Ruth Stark, thank you so much for grounding us in the right-based social work practice. Father Joe, thank you for reminding us of the values that should guide refugee protections. Mr. Bakir, thank you so much for amplifying the right to the participations and shared responsibility. And the last one, thank you, Mr. Teguh Zuliadi, for highlighting local realities and academic engagement in Aceh. A heartfelt thank you also to our moderator, Ibu Sri Rejeki Sulistiawati. Thank you, Ibu, for guiding us so smoothly through these discussions with care and clarity. We also acknowledge and thank Dr. Puji Pujiono, President of IPSPI, for opening today's sessions with powerful reflections and for IPSPI's continuous leadership in promoting professional social work in Indonesia. To all our partners, especially the Ministry of Social Affairs, the Indonesian National Council of Social Welfare, and our collaborating university, thank you. Thank you so much for your ongoing support. And of course, to all our participants, social workers, students, academics, humanitarian workers, and refugee communities from Zoom and YouTube, thank you. Thank you for being here and for standing in solidarity. Before we continue, just a few final announcements. If you like to revisit today's discussions, the recording will be available on the IPSPI's YouTube channels. Feel free to share it with your colleagues and network. For those who wish to receive an e-certificate, please make sure to fill out the attendance form, which has been shared in the Zoom chat box by our organizing team. We are also excited to announce our next ILS sessions happening next week on Wednesday, 25th June 2025, from 2 until 4 p.m. Jakarta time. Our featured speaker will be Professor Violet Horvath, Director of the Pacific Disabilities Center, John A. Burns School of Medicine, University of Hawaii. And she will speak on the topic social work in empowering people with disabilities. Please stay tuned through the IPSPI social media for many updates. With that, we officially close tonight's event. May today's conversation stay with you, inspire your work, and strengthen our collective commitment to justice, compassion, and solidarity. Thank you so much, everyone. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thanks,
Thank you
everyone.
very much. Thank you, Sohaila, Ibu Sri, Brother Bayani, Miss Ruth, Father Joe, and Miss Emily, and also to all the participants. Thank you very much, and see you in the
Thank you,
next
everyone. Bye-bye.
conversation.
Assalamualaikum.
Thank you. Bye-bye.